everyone from an extremely noisy and blustery Silverstone circuit. I'm here today to continue my JDM journey of discovery, and this week channel subscriber Ian has brought down his gorgeous Honda S2000. Now, until about 5 minutes ago, I'd never even sat in one of these things, so now I'm going to find out whether they deserve the iconic status that they have. Honda are a curious company when it comes to their history with performance in sports cars. Quite frankly, they never seem to be able to make their mind up as to whether they want to be involved with the market sector or not. In the early 1990s, Honda were basically the go-to guys if you wanted a high-revving, naturally aspirated, but good value driver's car. And the cars they made during that period, chiefly the Integra and the Civic, are still sought after by JDM fans and car enthusiasts of all types. And of course, the NSX has become legend, not just for its association with a certain and very popular Brazilian racing driver. Despite the fact that this car shared showroom space with many iconic stablemates, it has gone on to become a performance legend. Like the RX-7 that I drove last week, it is impossible to discuss this car without talking about its power plant. In this case, the heart of the S2000 is what Honda called the F20C. It is a 2-litre, 4-cylinder, naturally aspirated engine which produces just shy of 250 horsepower in Japanese spec and around 240 horsepower here. It has a red line of 8,800 RPM and fuel cutoff is at a stratospheric 9,000. Unfortunately, because of the way that the engine has been designed and due to its extremely high revving nature, peak torque is not generated until 7,500 RPM. And that torque figure isn't very impressive. In fact, it's only slightly over half that of a new entry-level Boxster. Halfway through this car's life cycle in the USA, it was facelifted into what was known as the AP2. The key change with that car was the fact that it received an enlarged version of the 2-litre engine. It grew to 2.2 litres, retained about the same power, but developed a little more torque, a little lower down, at the cost of a much lower redline, around 8,000 RPM versus the old 9. In Europe, however, we got to keep the original 2-litre engine, and the car was mildly facelifted but didn't receive the same dramatic changes that it did in the USA. So this is, if you're an American viewer, a facelift AP1. I must confess, I got a little confused myself about the difference, but basically this is a very late AP1. In fact, it's one of the latest. There's a 2009 plate. It is not an AP2. And despite the fact that Honda made another high-revving 2-litre engine called the K20 for their Civics, this engine is completely unrelated. Now, that fact and the fact that Honda never really sold very many of these may be part of the reason why when it was discontinued in 2009, there was no replacement. And as of 2017, there are still no official plans for Honda to make another. But as much as we can talk about that engine, the thing which in reviews of this car really comes across is how fun it is to drive, and that's something that Hondas have often been able to be proud of. So, how good is it really? Well, there's only one way to find out. So, first impressions of the car. The interior is very much Japanese, that is to say, much like the RX-7, everything is black. The general quality of materials in here feels very, very good by Honda standards. Obviously, this was a premium product in the Honda stable. I love the dash here. It's very, very 90s, very sort of almost Gran Turismo inspired, I guess. And it sort of apes the look of the Motec race displays where you've got this lovely rev counter that fills up most of the display and you've got a digital speedo. I really like digital speedos. I don't see why people bother making analog ones anymore, certainly not on sports cars. I mean, what's the point in an analog speedo when it reads 220 mile an hour and you're only ever going to do 70 on the road and you're never going to use the speedo on track? The gearbox in this car, I haven't pushed it yet, but just driving it normally, it's an absolute delight. I can see quite easily how that goes straight onto people's lists of best gearbox ever. It's smooth, it's very, very precise. It's not too notchy, but the throws are so short, so short. Obviously they kind of need to be, because you are going to need to change gear quite frequently when this car is on the boil. The view out the front is really nice. A bugbear of mine with many cars with long bonnets is that you often can't see them, but in this you can, which is very nice and helps you place the car much better. The car rides much better than I expected it to. I thought it'd be really stiff, but it's not. It's actually quite well damped. The only modification on this car is a Miltech exhaust, which of course helps the engine breathe a little better, but mostly just frees up a little bit more sound, because as standard it is, I'm told, a little bit too quiet for a sports car. That overtake was done without actually using the car's VTEC power band, so it really doesn't have much low-down torque, but it's adequate. Perhaps one issue of using this car, which is apparent and is, to be honest, something that most Civic Type-R owners will be familiar with, is the fact that the car is geared very short. So doing 60 mile an hour, you are doing 3,000 RPM. You get only 20 mile an hour for every 1,000 RPM. Now, to put that into context of what I'm used to, what this car is geared for in 6ths is what my Evora is geared for in 4th. Obviously the Evora has a lot more torque, so it can pull it, but this is the way that the car really needs to be for you to be able to get the most performance out of it. It's also reasonably noisy in here. You got a lot of tyre roar and a bit of wind roar, but in the context of it being a convertible, it's not hideous, to be fair. Just had a gentle play with the car in the higher RPM ranges. Now, compared to something like a Civic FN2 or even my Elise, the cam changeover is actually quite gentle. You can hear the engine note change, but you don't feel it so much. In my Elise, you really feel it. The whole car just goes clunk when it comes on cam. In this, it's very gentle. You don't get that instant extra shove of performance either. That seems to come when the engine is then in its last 2,000 RPM. So from 7,000 onwards, you really do start to feel it make progress. The really pleasant weight to this steering is really nice. The engine sounds great in the last couple of thousand RPM. In many ways, the car does remind me a little bit of my Elise, certainly the engine characteristics. So I had the 111R, and I got to be specific about that because it's that Elise in particular that I'm referring to. By having the engine set up in this way, where you've really got to work it to get the most out of it, that means that you can't enjoy the performance anywhere near as often as you would with, say, a supercharged or turbocharged car, but it does mean that when you do get that opportunity, it's great. It's very planted, it's very nice. You can get carried away with this quite easily. This car is definitely one that falls into a category where if you weren't used to driving a car of this type, you definitely think it wasn't very fast. If you drive it correctly, it's plenty quick enough. I wouldn't really want to go down this road much quicker than I am now. Yeah, sure, a little bit more torque out the corners would be great, but that really isn't what this car's all about. It's a very well balanced car. In fact, I'd probably come to a very similar conclusion to I did with the RX-7, which is that people talk about the S2000 and all they talk about is that engine. It's all about the engine, it's all about that crazy 9,000 RPM red line, all this stuff. But obviously that engine's fun, that engine's great, and that engine's definitely a star of the show. However, the rest of the car is not outclassed. The steering in particular is something that I'm actually really pleased about, because I did have a concern that it might not be great. Honda steering feel seems to alternate between brilliant and we've gone home for the day. And this is definitely in the former camp. It's got a nice weight to it. There's plenty of feel through the wheel. There's a lot of texture coming through. Is it a hydraulic system or is it electric? I'm not sure if it's hydraulic or electric, because Honda have dabbled with both. In fact, the early NSX was actually electric. And to be honest, I don't really care that much, because what I care about is the results, not the methods used to obtain them. This gearbox is perfect though. Yeah, the engine's great, but it's the gearbox you'd stay for. And it's very important as well, because if the gearbox was not up to scratch, the entire package would definitely be ruined. If that gearbox wasn't as good as it is, nothing would work. Let's talk about other things. So, pedal placement. Pedal placement is nice. You can heel and toe reasonably easily. Maybe the accelerator pedals are a little far over, but suppose if I put slightly bigger shoes on, that'd fix that. I'm wearing really, really narrow shoes. Yes, there is no torque load down at 4,000, 5,000 RPM. You put your foot down and yeah, there's nothing there. But that can be remedied, because at 4,000 RPM, you aren't even half the way to the red line yet. The wheel itself feels really, really nice. It's kind of thin, kind of solid, which I like. I like the more old-fashioned wheels that aren't super, super padded. Everything in this interior is mega driver focused. Everything is pointed towards you. In fact, there's nearly nothing in this interior over on the passenger side bar an air vent. Even the stereo is hidden behind a little foldy flap here, and that's very classic Honda. The sound system in here is standard, which I can barely believe, because it's actually really, really good. It's got plenty of bass to it, and frankly, there are a lot of car makers that completely overlook the stereos in their cars. Lotus, I'm looking at you. And no, this is great. This is really, really nice. In fact, it's this owner's third S2000, having had a number of other very nice and exotic cars, including 911 Turbo and an Esprit, and I can see why he's come back to this, because it's a really, really nice car. To make things even better, this being a Honda, very few things break on it. More to the point, Honda's servicing costs are very, very low. Even at a main dealer, an oil change is only around £180, and the big major check your clearances service, which happens every 4 years, is around £600. Now, that may seem a lot to some people, but I should point out that the equivalent service on an E46 M3 is around £900. This particular car's got 63,000 miles on the clock, and it feels pretty much brand new. Everything in here works, everything's nice to the touch. Okay, some of the buttons and things may look like a cheap Japanese car. I don't really care. It doesn't feel like a cheap Japanese car. It feels like a serious, nice, proper sports car. And that's kind of what you sign up for when you buy one of these. So I've just been asked the question, which is, how does the size and the weight of this car feel compared to an Elise? Now, I checked the numbers, and although this car isn't a flyweight, at 1,250 kilos, that's still pretty lightweight considering the performance on offer. Now, the driving experience is totally different, because you're in a completely different part of the car compared to the Elise. In the Elise, you sit much, much further forward compared to this. There's generally a lot more heft in this compared to the Elise. The only time that that's reversed is when you're at basically parking speeds, because the Elise has unassisted steering, so they can be quite heavy. The Exige in particular, if you've got sticky rubber on it, when you're trying to move around a car park, can be very, very heavy. But once you're on the move, it lightens up considerably. I would say on the move, this feels a little heavier in the steering. Neither of them are particularly bad. In terms of steering feel, I would say the Elise has it, but that's mostly because an Elise will beat nearly anything. This is very, very good for what it is. I'd much, much prefer one of these over an MX-5. In fact, yeah, if there's a petition for getting Honda to do another one of these, someone send me the link. I want to sign it.